we are. And you mentioned King Charlie, and this is an interesting one. I've always been a monarchist, and talking to a lot of my friends, love Queen Elizabeth, the monarchy. That is changing. And here in the Daily Express, royal family faces breaking point as support drops below 50% for the first time. Public support has dropped below 50%, according to new findings in a poll. I think this is a change. Obviously, whenever we move from Queen Elizabeth on to King Charles, that was a massive change in our society, in our culture, in our history. And it's interesting the amount of people who don't have much love, not only for Charles, but obviously you mentioned about his speech. I think the BBC picked up that the most important part, that he was beside a Christmas tree that could be replanted. Forget about the birth of Jesus and the special time of year. It's about a Christmas tree. But what are your thoughts on the royal family, Godfrey?
Well, of course, this was inevitable, and I said it was inevitable some years ago. Her Majesty had war service, for better or worse, and she made some constitutional mistakes, of which there is no doubt. Yeah. But she was broadly loved and respected by, not just in this country, by the whole world, and particularly, of course, the Commonwealth. And I held the Queen's Commission, as did my father, held the King's Commission, and so on and so forth, back several generations in point of fact. So we are monarchists. I come from a monarchist family. I'm not too sure which side my family took in the, whether it was parliamentarian or for King Charles I, I couldn't tell you. But that's neither here nor there. And I think most of the country are monarchists. They may not be sort of rabid monarchists in much the same way that most of them are Christian. If they're indigenous population Christian, that doesn't mean to say they go to church. They're not God botherers, but broadly speaking, live a Christian life as best they can, as I do, as we all do probably. But we're not a big, beat the drum, really come to the mission kind of people. Now, what's happened is with Charles, first of all, he's intellectually dishonest, and that's people aren't as stupid as the media think they are. They know intellectual dishonesty. They will not be preached at about when they go on holiday, or whether they turn their heating up, or whether they use so-called fossil fuels, which are fossil fuels incidentally, but leaving that aside. All these things by somebody who has Windsor Castle, Balmoral, Sandringham, Highgrove, and it goes on and it goes on, who was a champion of organic food, now wants us to eat presumably organic bugs, I don't know. But the guy is intellectually dishonest. He also peddles what I think most people know in their hearts of fake science. And he made it clear the other day, I think it was before, because he said, I've been banging on about this for 30 years, climate change and all this. And nobody would stand up and say, yes, 30 years, so when's it going to happen? You've been at it for 30 years and it hasn't happened, you silly little man. And this is the problem. And of course, he's surrounded with sycophants. Yeah. And I've seen some of this stuff over the years from the inside. He has a very large staff. The Duchy of Cornwall pays for it, who agree with everything he says. It doesn't matter what silly thing he says, everybody will applaud and say that was brilliant. Nobody says, just a minute, don't you think you ought to do a bit more homework? Or just a minute, there's no evidence for what you've just said. Or don't you think you're pushing your luck a bit, living the lifestyle that you do as one of the world's richest men, criticizing the little guy who wants to go to Spain on his holidays? He's not getting any of this. And of course, where I think he actually lost it to start with, he married a beautiful girl, socially his superior. The Windsors are really just middle class, to be brutally frank. They're middle class. He married a noblewoman from a family much, much older and more prestigious than his face. So he shouldn't have married out of his class. That's point one. And yes, okay, she was probably a bit of an airhead, but she was a pretty girl. And I think a lot of people, and she was very popular. And I think a lot of people said, well, look, you've got so many houses. You've got 5 houses. You've got staff. You've got servants. You've got cars. You've got chauffeurs. Couldn't you have made it work? Couldn't you have just made it work just to set an example, couldn't you have done that? Or you were too lazy, arrogant, and appalling to just try and make it work for the good of the children, for the good of the family, for the good of the country. He could have made it work. He could have worn the mask, if you like. But no, that was too much trouble. Then worse, he puts his mistress on the throne. Yeah. Now, I come from a very middle-class background, fairly bourgeois. We don't like that kind of thing. You keep your mistress a bit secret if you've got a mistress, and we're not French, so you shouldn't have one anyway. He's made no effort. And I think now that he's reaping, and if he thinks it's 48% in favour of the monarchy, you ain't seen nothing yet. Yeah. We'll have this conversation in a year's time, and it'll be probably 27, 28%. And I wrote an article some years ago now on Going Postal. Some years ago saying, will the monarchy survive Charles? The answer is, I don't think it will. And there's no point in putting his son on the throne and abdicating, because his son's just as bad. He's another WEF stooge. And he really is not very bright.
Yeah, a lot of Americans say, I'll go straight to William, and I point out that would be no better. He's just younger, no different.
As most of you know, my work is very heavily independently research-based, and I get my information from all over the world. It would help if you press the subscribe button and the little bell next to it, because the more subscribers I have, the more likely it is that international independent research institutes will share their material with me. It's most helpful, and then of course I automatically share it with you. So, surprise, won't cost you anything. Thank you very much.